Thank you very much. My name is Issa Jean Marie. I'm a front-end lead at Awesomity Lab. I write codes.
Hi, my name is Rutakayile. I'm a software engineer in Irembo, working on the Irembo Go team, and I also write code.
Hi everyone, my name is LoИc. I am a software engineer as well, senior front-end engineer currently at RSSB. And I don't want to say I also write codes because everyone said that, but I do write codes.
Oh, they're being a bit humble. They're experts in front-end engineering. So as all of you know, the topic today is optimizing the front-end performance of web applications. I'm sure y'all are ready for an engaging conversation. Feel free to ask any question at any point. So we're just going to flow through this with the conversation. So as we all know, efficient web page loading is paramount to enhance user experience. In today's digital landscape, users expect instant access to information. Performance of website applications plays a crucial role in user experience, whether it involves accommodating high website traffic, delivering real-time analytics to users, or making multiple API calls to serve a single request to a user. I'm sure most of you have had people tell you to clear cache using Cognito or a lighter browser that is not Google so that you can access a website. So today we'll be mostly talking about how do we ensure that users don't have to go through many hurdles to access a service like Irembo, for example. That anyone with a 3G or a 4G network or with Motorola or an iPhone can access any website without it endlessly loading. So the conversation will be about what are the standards, methods that would help us achieve that. So, let's start with why. I'm gonna start with you, Sam. Why do you think that front-end performance is important?
Well, thank you. I think front-end performance is important because it plays a part in the general first impression and general impression that a user is going to have on the application. It's just like customer service. If you go on a bank or you're trying to go on a shop and service takes too long, you're gonna get a bit stressed or annoyed because of the duration of how long it takes to actually get the service that you want. And it's the same with web apps or web applications. If you have a product that you're trying to sell, but a user takes very long to actually reach to it, it's an issue. Additionally on that, the performance of a web page actually impacts also the devices that the users use. Like you mentioned, if I have a phone that's not really, let's say, optimal like an iPhone, it's probably going to take more resources out of my device. It's going to take more battery. It's probably also going to eat my bundles. And no one here wants to use all of their bundles up. So I think it's really useful and helpful because it plays a part in the general user experience of your web application. Yeah.
What about you, Issa? Why do you think it's important?
I think obviously it should be slow. The web application comes to solve a problem, and that problem has to be solved in the optimist way. It has to be optimal. If you are trying to sell someone something through your web application and they want to buy a shoe, they click maybe add to cart, it takes 1 minute, they're gonna give up, and the conversion rate is going to be low, so your business will fail. I would say in terms of business, I'm not a businessman, but in terms of business, it affects your business like 100%. I don't know. If your business relies on internet, then it's affecting if it's slow or fast. It's giving what you need, if you need conversion or you need people's attention. So all of those depend on that performance.
Okay.
Just to cut it short, can you speak louder so that people at the back can hear?
Okay, sure. LoИc, speak louder.
Yes. So I think they both touched on so many of of the main points. It's 2023. It's the age of TikTok. I mean, attention span is at the lowest. Everyone wants everything very quickly. So if you get on a web page and it's taking longer than a second, literally, or I mean, I think the average. I think 3 seconds is the attention span where it is right now. If it takes longer than what they're used to, they're gonna bounce. They're gonna go somewhere else. Especially if you're, if you're offering a service that has competition, that those metrics will affect business directly. So that's I think performance of a web application is very tied to business metrics as well. So as a business, as a service provider, you want to make sure that it's optimal.
Okay. So now that we all agree that this is a very important topic because we don't want our users to bounce, as you said. So we're going to go into causes. Maybe let me go back to Sam. Can you share an example of a particularly challenging web page performance issue that you have faced, and what was the cause?
Sure. I think in terms of the challenging instance, it's probably around last year, end of last year here when we opened up the driving license slots. I think at that time it had been a really long time since any slot were opened, meaning a lot of people wanted to get their driver's license. And so when the news got out that the slots opened, then obviously a lot of people wanted to access the platform at the time. And the challenge was, before we used to have average rate. It wasn't too high, but it wasn't also too low of users accessing the platform. And so what would happen would be, we'd sort of see that the platform is going relatively good, but when we opened up when the service was made available for people to apply, that's when we could see some performance issues. And it wasn't just on the front end, it was across the entire application. So it wasn't just like a UI activity or a front end activity, it was working with everyone in engineering, in DevOps, and infrastructure to make it work. But specifically on the UI part, we noticed that there were some hurdles or some sort of hiccups that were causing the platform to not really be optimal and not be delivered to the users all the time. And one of the causes were, one, the caching mechanism that we were using. We had a caching mechanism, but it wasn't working very well, especially in our service worker, the way we had configured it. The way we were trying to make requests, I think at some point we were trying to make too many requests, but the most obvious one was in the configuration of our web server. So at the time, the configuration we had could only allow a specific amount of users simultaneously. And that's why at some point when we had a specific amount of people connecting all at once, we would see something not working well. And so, like I mentioned, we worked with the infrastructure team to look at the issue and then do the needful to configure it.
Okay. Yeah. So what about you, Issa? What are some common errors or bad practices that usually lead to bad web page performance?
Common errors, I would say people.
People.
Not errors, but they are errors. One would be unoptimized code base. That's the best one. The entire application not based on is built from the code base. That be one. So if it is not well optimized, you have like thousands of loops nested, or you don't handle your API requests as mentioned very well. That's going to cause issue. I remember one day I was having this issue with requests where I could request something multiple times, but I didn't know I was doing that until I inspected. Then I saw it's happening, so that's why I took measures. But that's another thing that can lead to maybe slowing down your application. People are actually making unnecessary requests and then they keep waiting and waiting. Other thing might be using bad tools. For example, if you're getting started with a project and you consider using jQuery, so if your application it's obviously going to be slow. So you have to make sure the kind of tools you're using are up to date and are going to help your application be as fast as possible. Another thing I'm about to say is not someone else said a problem well stated is a problem half solved. So if you don't know that your application is slow, you won't know what to solve. So other thing that maybe causes your application to slow down, even slower, is not getting those metrics, not measuring that it's going slow. There are tools that can help you do that, so to make sure you are aware of what's happening and take your first step in solving that problem.
Okay. LoIc, do you have any insight on the causes?
On the causes?
Yes.
Again, those were very great points you guys made. But I think I'm gonna side with Issa on this one. I'm gonna just emphasize on what he said about measuring everything. Someone told me once, you can't improve something you don't measure. So if you can't measure those metrics, if you don't know where the bottlenecks are in the user flow, you really can't improve it. So it's really important from the get-go to have tools like Google Analytics, Microsoft Clarity, and many more that do that for you and give you exactly what it really feels like magic when you use those tools, because let's say you have an application in production, and people are complaining that something is not going right, or they can't do something. They can get to a point in your application. You literally have now tools that will show you videos of a user encountering the problem. Like, they record those things, and it's just up to you to fix those issues as fast as you can. So yeah, I think measuring is very important. That's a good thing.
Okay, great. So now that we understand the causes, most of us know that ensuring web performance starts before coding. So I want us to look a bit at some of the design best practices to ensure that the optimization of web applications. So coming back to you, Sam, it feels like I'm attacking you, but how do you design your front-end applications for good performance at the get-go?
I think it goes a bit similar to what Issa and LoIc just explained. It's mostly having a good set of measurement and metrics, but also being able to sort of analyze your code base and sort of pick the areas that could affect your performance the most. And most times that has to do with your assets, has to do with your CSS files. Most times we just pull the whole entire CSS without knowing all of the classes there that we actually need. And sometimes we even use pictures that are too big for even containing in the devices that we have. So a good thing would be using those metrics and picking those areas and saying, how can I improve those areas? And in terms of images and videos, some of the things that you could do, like easy wins, would just be able to compress them. Most times the devices that the images or the videos will be displayed on, in most cases, will not be up to the level of the quality that they were generated. Some videos are done in 8K, and I don't think that anybody with the Motorola that you've mentioned is gonna actually be viewing the video and the experience that you hope you would. So compressing those areas help, and in addition to that, having a way you can easily deliver those assets to people. An easier way would be to have them available through a CDN. If possible, you could have those assets delivered to you through a CDN, so they can be easily accessible to whoever is trying to access your web platform, whether it be in Rwanda or in the US. And in terms of the CSS, I think one of the good things would be trying to remove the areas that cause the CSS to be big. The ways you can do that is by minifying. I think most commonly known usage is by minifying, and also trying to remove the styling that's not used. I think we'll talk about that a bit later, but there's also a process you can do to remove the CSS that you actually don't use. But even in addition to that, you can use some coding practices that actually help you to avoid to have a higher or a larger CSS file that you would need. I think one of the practices that you could use is the BEM model, block element module, where you have a specific naming pattern in your CSS that will help you to avoid to repeat the same styling over and over again. So I think, in addition to that, I think also having proper linting and code formatting helps, because at the end of the day, if you have unused imports, even though it's a small effect, it still affects, and having that in your process still helps. So yeah.
Yeah, great. So LoІc, coming back to you. At the design stage of a front-end web development, which practices do you use to ensure that the performance of your website will be optimized for a wide range of devices and internet speeds?
Sure. So at the design stage, I would say, make sure, work with your designers, make sure you have designs for every device available, because I've seen, we've worked, I think, who's here is a front-end engineer, just by show of hand, or works with front-end.
Oh, wow. All of you guys.
Okay. I think it's majority of the people here. So we've all worked with either a designer who just gives you like a mock-up of a desktop page and be like, go ahead, or just no designer at all. It's just you doing the design. So you want to make sure that you know how your web page is going to look on every device, so that you can then make decisions when it comes to using responsive images, because sometimes you wanna display the image that you want to display on a desktop screen, that doesn't have to be the same that you display on the phone, because that would be just wasting people's money, really, literally. So you wanna be able to, and also poor performance. So you wanna be able to take those decisions. But I think prototyping, I'm a big fan and I'm a big advocate of prototyping. Before you even get started. I know it's most people don't like to do that, but it's getting more traction. If you can get the application or the app that you're building into users' hands before you even start writing a single line of code, that has amazing it just helps even with performance, because we all have encountered I think we've been as developers, we've been through a place where we've built a feature, we've put it out there, and it's either useless or you want to refactor it, and you end up refactoring a ton of code, or even having dead code in your repo, in your code base, and all that will affect performance on the long run. So you really want to have the least or the minimal refactoring and iterations when you put something out there. And I think prototyping is huge. So that would be my input on that.
Great input at that. So we're going to go to coding, since it's where the magic happens. You all say that you're coders, so this should be easy. So Sam, do you favor maybe certain frameworks or coding tools when it comes to coding your front-end application?
I feel like what I'm going to say is going to be a bit controversial to some people. In terms of frameworks and tools, I think it's better to come to the point of saying, okay, what do I need in this scenario? And most times what you need is to be able to measure, to analyze, and then to fix and to prevent. And you sort of want to find the tools that help you in those categories. Like we've mentioned about metrics and all that, that falls into the category of measuring. And in terms of frameworks, I don't think there's any that really helps in terms of measurement. Most times the frameworks help in terms of fixing and preventing. And the frameworks that I would tend to use is Angular. That's where the controversy comes. And I think it's a pretty useful tool. I know some people feel some type of way about it, but the good thing is it has already some opinionated standards that it guides you to follow. It's not like it forces you, but it just helps you to have a common standard that you use. And I feel like it helps not only into the fact of performance, but even into the development lifecycle in general. For those who don't like Angular, there's also Next.js. Next.js is a really good framework built on React that helps. And I think even their documentation is really useful in terms of not only just performance, but even security and all that stuff. So yeah, I think in terms of the frameworks, that's where I would tend. In terms of the tools, I think that's where you can use like the measurement and trying to analyze and fixing also. So in terms of the measurements, there's some tools you could use like Lighthouse, there's PageSpeed, Insights. I know some people are going to try to open up Lighthouse and test it on our websites, but that's okay. So they're really useful because they sort of help you to understand what's the metric or the level that you could say that your app is performant. And the good thing is they already have a metric that they've set, so it's built by Google. Google took some time to really understand those metrics and set a standard. And I think instead of trying to use our own or create our own, it's better to just follow what they've been using. And on top of that, it also helps you to identify where you have some issues in your platform. So I think, same thing I guess with the Page Insights. They sort of help you get some understanding of the platform. In terms of fixing, I guess I would use some things like Purge CSS. That's one of the tools related to what I've talked about earlier about really trying to make sure you don't deploy code or CSS that's considered duplicate or unused. And there's also like some standards you can set instead of sort of like setting the maximum size of your application that can be deployed. So sometimes we might have a lot of features we want to put in, and we're developing really fast, but we sort of forget that in the end, what we're adding in is going to really impact the size of our application. And it's good to, instead of every time checking what's the size, having a tool that actually helps you to know the size and even prevent you from deploying if it reaches a certain level. I think in terms of, another good tool is Gulp. So Gulp helps a lot in terms of compressing and in terms of the compression of your assets. Instead of always having to do that manually, it's always good to have a process that helps you to do that. I'm pretty sure no one here likes to do things over and over again. So having that kind of tool that helps you is also good. I think those are the tools I feel like are helpful. I guess I would also add like something that also helps in terms of quick wins, which is Broadly. Broadly is a wonderful tool that helps in terms of compressing your application size. So let's say you're not able to really meet the bundle size and the limit that you wanted for your application. You can still make use of compression tools like Broadly or gzip to really reduce the size of your application so it can easily be provided to your clients.
You gave best practices, tools, everything. So, LoIc, what are the top 3 coding rules that you apply for high-end performance?
Top 3 coding. Okay. So, personally, I would say it's hard to come up with a top 3, but caching is very important. You know, especially as a front-end developer. You wanna set up a caching strategy from the get-go. You don't want to end up 5 days before go live and you find out that your website is crappy. It's not loading as fast as you want. So you want to really install those strategies from the get-go, and also use the right tool. Use the right tool for the job. There are some amazing tools out there like SAM. Name per JS, all those great tools. You want to have a set of tools that will help you get to the results you want, performance-wise, right? So I would say if you could also, what I like to do, even though it's not a very straightforward thing to do, but if you happen to have a CI/CD pipeline, it's really nice to to integrate those tools into the CI/CD pipeline. Like you mentioned, Lighthouse. There's a tool that's it's called On Lighthouse. I don't know if you know about it. It basically, you can integrate it in your CI/CD pipeline, and it will basically measure those metrics, performance metrics, those core web vitals that Google created every time you deploy something, every time you push your code to, whether GitHub Actions or whatever, it will do that for you. So, in the midst of building your application, you will be sure 100% that it's performant. Going through that. So that would be how many is that? Two?
Two. That's two.
That's two.
That one to go.
Yeah. Okay. So one other thing is I really dislike. Let me just say dislike. Running any sort of heavy computation on the front end. That's just not a good practice. You really want to give that to the backend guys, or if you're a backend guy yourself, do it on the backend. Because you really don't want to. First of all, it's a bad practice because any heavy computation will affect the render process. Of course, you can do asynchronously. You could do it in the background, but any computation that you do on the front end is very likely to change in the future. That's very likely to change in the future. Unless it's really, really well tested, it's gonna fail at some point. So I like to do all the heavy stuff on the back end. So that's my third point. Avoid heavy computations on the front end.
Do you have one more?
One more? Yes, maybe one more. Yeah, reusability. On the front end, I mean, this is the era of component-based component-based front-end frameworks. React, Vue, everything. I think even Flutter, right? It's component-based. So if you could, make sure you don't have 10,000 different variations of a button, that would be great. You want to be able to reuse those components. It will decrease your code base size. It's what everybody's doing, so it must be good. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much. So Issa, web.dev provides a lot of resources to ensure high-end performance. Web.dev. Yeah. Which ones have you successfully applied?
I would say Lighthouse. Lighthouse, page speed insights, the best tools to use. They've talked about them. Maybe I can go a little bit.
Yes.
Deeper. When you're using, for example, Lighthouse, it offers very detailed information that you can use to solve your issues. It gives you how long does it take for the first content to appear on your application. Maybe how long does it take for your largest content. Do people over there hear me? Yeah. It can show you how long your largest content in your website takes to load, and gives you very detailed information. It can tell you in this file you have can tell you the function or whatever, but can tell you in this certain file it's taking too long to load. And another thing that gives you how long it takes for your page to load entirely, and that's actually the best thing to know. Your page takes maybe more than 3 seconds in business, and if it takes more than 3 seconds, that's what people are expecting. If they're expecting, people are expecting your website to be there in less than 3 seconds, and then it's taking 6. You're failing. You're failing.
Okay.
So the tools I used is Insight. Lighthouse. I use it every day. Another one is Page Speed Insights. Another one is relevant to WebDev, but it's Google, so it's the same thing. Potato. It's Google Google Analytics. It gives you, for example, Lighthouse is it's specifically for web pages, but if you use it on dashboards, it's somehow inefficient. There's some information it doesn't give you, but with Google Analytics, it measures, it keeps track of user interactions and can say it takes longer for maybe this page to when it goes API, it takes longer to respond. Those kind of things, on platforms that require interactions. But with normal websites, web pages, you can simply use Lighthouse and give you everything you need.
Okay, so you heard it. Lighthouse is the key. So as we know that optimization doesn't end when you ship the code to production, I would want to hear more about optimization from the experts. So, LoІc, what are the metrics that you use to ensure that the code that you have in production are actually performing well?
So there are some standards, industry standards, that, and I feel like we keep talking about Google, but it's true. They've done a lot of work on the web development community. And so there's these standards that they've set called Core Web Vitals, like the Sam and Issa have been talking about them. The first contentful, the largest contentful paint, yes. The first input delay and many more. So if you can make sure that those, if you can make sure that you are recording those, measuring those, I mean, it's just a matter of improving them. And like we said, with using those tools, like my favorite to use is Clarity by Microsoft, because it's free. And it's just a matter of pinpointing those bottlenecks and those things that are making your pages slow and addressing them. It's really simple to do that now, and I feel like the frameworks that we have now. Issa mentioned jQuery. I used to love jQuery. Not anymore. Because there's React, there's so many cool frameworks, Vue, Flutter, so they make it so simple for us to really just focus on the problem to solve and less on the configuration. And you could literally build a website using Next.js, and I guarantee you, if you test it with Lighthouse, chances are it's performing well without even doing any optimizations, because they've taken care of all the small things that used to take us days. Who used to struggle with Webpack? Is it just me? Webpack actually. Thank God they made things like that, but like you don't have to go through all that. So my advice to anyone that's starting a new project, it's kind of easy to have good performance now. Just use a great, one of these great tools that we have, but make sure you keep measuring everything. That's it.
What are some of the techniques that you've used to optimize those metrics?
Optimize them. Okay, so when you know where the problem is, it's easy to go through your code, identify the, things that need to be cached. For instance, you might have a page that's taking, 4 seconds, 1 second longer than the attention span. And looking through it, you might realize that there are images that are, there's a ton of images on that. Let's say you're building like a, social media, Airbnb, whatever. There's tons of images on there. You want to be able to use techniques like lazy loading. I don't know if you guys know what lazy loading is. It's basically you only render the images that are on the screen. So as you scroll, the images that pop up will get rendered. And again, some frameworks do that for you. So you can do it on your own, but I would suggest you use a framework. Another thing would be, Sam touched on this earlier, make sure you optimize your assets. I remember once I deployed an application and I had forgotten to minify the CSS. Thank God it was on staging, but I was like, why is this slow? And then I just realized it was just the CSS was not minified. Ended up doing that. So make sure you minify everything, compress the images, render the correct sizes of images. Those I think if you can identify the biggest chunks of code or assets that are slowing down your application, it's very easy to address those.
Yeah, thank you. Issa, coming back to you. So how do you measure the actual experience of your users on their devices or their connectivity?
One will be using that application myself. But as a developer, my testing skills are so bad. Yeah, when I'm testing, I expect it to be working. But I would say programmatically or technically, the way I would do that is using the tools we have mentioned. I'm not going to say Lighthouse again, but I will, Lighthouse. But when they're in production, you can maybe, if you are working in Next and deploy to Verso, it offers even, I think, a library for that, Verso Analytics. Then it keeps track of your user's experience, and then they can show you the analytics, what's happening, what pages are affecting your performance, and those kind of things. Another is, we did mention that as well. Google Analytics gives you the whole picture of your application, how it's performing, all kinds of things that you need. The things maybe you look at first to make sure it's not affecting your performance or what users are expecting would be, I also did say that, people, when a website takes maybe 3 seconds to load, that's good. But if it takes maybe 7 seconds, that's not good. But if it loads something fast, it's actually a little bit good, If I wait for 7 seconds and I didn't see anything, I'll be bored. I'll say, what is going on? But if maybe there's even a loader or a button or something, my hopes will go a little bit high, I think, okay, it's coming. So one metric one thing to make sure of is the FCP, the first content footprint. How long does it take for the first content to appear on a web application? That's very crucial. You have to make sure those seconds are in milliseconds, they're not seconds. So if someone can see at least one thing, then they keep waiting. At least. Maybe another thing, adding maybe loaders. So if you know maybe my application is taking long because it's calling API or something, you can maybe use loaders. They have costs, but the cost is too little. It's too little not to use them. So you can use them, for people to be patient. So I would say I'd measure the first content footprint. That's very crucial. And another one, maybe I'd make sure it's responsive. It's working on mobile. So I'm not expecting buttons to fall apart when they go on a website in their phones. That's another thing you have to keep in mind. And just it's really different. If your web page, your website is fast in your computer, sometimes it'll be slow in phone if you're not careful. So you have to also minify those files. Just JavaScript and CSS, but it's been taken care of, so you don't have to do that anymore. Most of libraries do that for you, and then make sure you are not using compress the assets. You can ask your designers to compress them if you don't want.
Okay. Yeah. What about you, Sam? Can you share some insights on the same question? What techniques do you use to ensure that the users don't have high-end performance on the application?
Well, I think one of the first things to avoid is trying to install unnecessary packages. Sometimes you see in your package the JSON is number and you're like, just use that in this condition. Exactly. So maybe trying to really check the need for having the packages you're using and seeing if you actually need them, and if not, using your own or doing your own implementation, because you'd be surprised as to what dependencies lie on the dependencies that lie on the dependencies for that NPM package. So really trying to be careful as to the type of packages you're trying to install in your application to avoid having a really large bundle size. Another one would be sort of prioritizing what you want to be delivered to the user. I think Issa touched it as to making sure that at least there are some things that are visible before some others. And some of the ways you can do it is by preloading some assets or some fonts or some piece of code that you need the user to actually see before everything else. And inlining, especially inlining the CSS. So making sure that if there are the main areas in your web application, the text and the font that are used should be inlined and be available before everything else. Because if you wait for all of the assets to be loaded in your application, you might run into the occasional network call where your internet maybe breaks, and then you see this funny looking application where the text is all over the place. I think also LoІc touched on it about lazy loading. Not only lazy loading the components, but also lazy loading the pages and the routes. If you end up having like an application that has 50 pages, which is possible, and you don't lazy load, you have all of the pages available to the user at once, which they don't really need. So really making sure that you only make available to the user what they need at the time. I think also it goes in hand with working with the backend team. So if you have any network requests that you have to do, trying to avoid to get, like, if you're trying to get a list of items, avoiding to get all of them and using pagination. Pagination is a really helpful way to avoid having really long delays in network calls. And trying to also look at the areas that the application makes network calls on and see the type of information that you don't need to be updated frequently, and having your caching system to sort of cache that in the user's browser through a service worker to avoid information to constantly be pushed by or pulled by the API. I think also avoiding to have blocking code. So really trying wherever possible, making asynchronous, your codes run asynchronously to not block any interaction with the user. Because if a user tries to do an interaction and the logic of that code is blocking, then you're going to have a really weird behavior in your project. And I think also working with, Issa touched on that, working with your UI or UX to have a way to present animations when something is loading, so that someone doesn't just expect the whole page to come at once, but really having at least one asset that's visible, loading or whatever, to show that we're processing something. It might take a bit of time, but we're on it. And yeah, trying to really provide some good user experience on the user side. And I think also it's not really related to performance, but it's more of trying to see where are some bottlenecks or some issues. I think using tools that help you also measure the interaction of the user is good. So also knowing where some issues or errors came from, or some delays came into are helpful. And a tool like Sentry is a wonderful tool to help you track that information. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, all of you. Unfortunately, I'm done with the questions that I thought about for these guys. So we're going to get to the part where you guys ask the question. But before that, I would love for you to give resources that all the front-end engineers can use to apply these tools. So maybe Issa, you can start.
I was gonna say read the documentation. YouTube is a really wonderful place to find some resources to help, and I think there are also some other good websites or blogs that help. You've mentioned WebDev. WebDev has an entire section about performance. So most of the things that we even talked about is most likely to be in that area. But if you want to get specific into like the tooling and the specific framework that you're using, I think reading the documentation of the framework you're trying to look into is a good way. But there's also a good website called perf.rocks. So perf.rocks has a, like a curated list of all of the tools that you can use for performance. So you really can't miss any kind of performance tool that you need in that. And it also has some good conventions and talks and blogs that they write about performance specifically on the content. So yeah, I think YouTube documentation if you can, and the perf.rocks are good resources.
What about you?
I was gonna say perf.rocks as well, which is a website that I found out doing research for this talk. I was like, what are the... Yeah, so I found out that it's a really good resource. I mean, you guys have to check it out. It's really, really great if you want to improve any part of your web applications. I learned some stuff myself. One thing they've mentioned YouTube. YouTube is great, but one thing that helps me personally is to be connected to the community, to the web front-end web development community. So that means following people on Twitter that talk about these things, performance. Personally, I follow a few people that are very knowledgeable about web development and performance. People like Ken C. Dodds, people like Josh Como, just like some people who really have good insight on front end. So, read their blog posts. You learn a few things by doing that. So, but YouTube ChatGPT, I think, that's the dream team.
Easiest one. So we're ready for questions. I think Giza will give you a mic. So who has a question?
My name is Ep05 from University of Rwanda, and I'm currently a trainee at Andela Rwanda under ATLP program. The question I have goes to Irembo team. Personally, I frequent sometimes like after 3 weeks, I load Irembo and it keeps just loading, and and it requires me to go and clean the whole browser. This question, Jesus Christ, it takes me a long time to, oh my God, I'm going to apps and go to the browser and clean everything. Even my email account, I'm going to just clean it and synchronize again. So what would like to ask, I just want to ask are you aware of that problem? That's first question. So if you are aware of it, do you know the cause?
Yeah, so like I had mentioned a while ago, the main reason is because of our caching mechanism. We still have some work to do, especially in the way we render the assets. And just because of the sheer size of the application, it's more of an iterative process that we're trying to do. In addition to that, like I had mentioned, if you have a big application, you need to have something that helps you analyze where the issue comes from. So most times you might find that the issue is not just about the caching, but more of code logic that failed somewhere, right? And because you reset the cache, it then removes some of the information that we needed in order for the coding logic to actually be captured. So, like I said, it's an iterative process. We are aware of the issues and we are trying to make our best to resolve them, but it's an iterative process. And thank you for adding that. That means we still have a lot more.
Okay, before we move on, I would like to ask, is there a way I can just solve that problem without clearing the whole browser of mine?
Well, it depends on the issue that happened.
Okay.
If it's an issue that's related with maybe the caching update, so somewhere along the way the service worker failed to synchronize what you have in your browser with what's actually available, that's where there's a problem. I think that one has been resolved. The challenge would mostly be in the coding logic. And at that point, I don't think there's much of a solution. Yeah.
Open and incognito. That's what I do.
Okay, thank you. That was my question.
We saw another question in this area.
Okay, my name is Kibogora, and I'm a student at Advanced University of Central Africa. So my question goes to Sam. What, like, how? What's the role of backend architecture in making sure that the front end the front end works better? Like,
Do you mean in terms of performance?
yeah, in terms of performance, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like I had mentioned, if there's any call that the UI has to make in the backend, we need to find the way to implement and optimize it. One of the ways is using pagination. So if you have an endpoint that's supposed to give you thousands of items, you don't want to give all those items in one go. You just want to have a way to iteratively get those items when the user needs it. And it depends on the case scenario of how you want something to work with the backend. Another thing would be, I guess, measuring the metrics and the time it takes for the UI to make a natural call to the API. Sometimes the API is fast, it's just that the communication between the two is not as alike. So using some tools, maybe like New Relic, can help you to sort of measure the performance and the delay between the two.
So my question goes to you all. So as we all know, rendering pattern affect heavily the performance and the usability of the website. So I wanted you guys to share your perspective on the rendering patterns, server-side rendering, static side generation, and client-side rendering. And how do you think these patterns affect the usability and performance of the website?
Sure, I can answer that. So I think you want to use the right tool for the right problem, right? So let's say you want to build something that's very interactive, right? Something that is going to require a lot of interaction between the UI and the user. You want to use something that's that's built for that. I know back in a couple years ago, React came up and we all jumped on it, most of us. And we, along the way, we realized that there was a huge problem with the bundle size, right? So then server-side rendering came through, which solved a big chunk of the problem, right? So if I'm going to build myself, I'm going to build something that's very interactive. I'll go with something that's something like React, but also using server-side rendering, right? So that you don't have to load tons of JavaScript that you don't have to use immediately, right? There are other ways, some touched on them, lazy loading, code splitting, that's gonna help you use something like Create React App, but still, experience good performance. But if you use something like server rendering with Next.js, that's just gonna completely disappear. That problem is gonna disappear, right? So I would go for that. But if I'm gonna build a blog, which is something that literally a user comes and just scrolls, I'm probably gonna do something like static site generation, something like Hugo, or I'm not gonna go for something that's gonna require me to install 70 packages when it's just that's my personal preference.
You wanted all of us to answer? Okay, cool. I think I'll go with the same route that LoIc touched on. And it depends on the tool that you're using. If you have the luxury of actually deciding the tool that you want to use, and you have flexibility to actually choose the tool that you want, server-side, using a tool that has server-side rendering is always good. Next.js has that out of the box. Angular also has that. Also, you kind of have to do some tinkering to have that working, but it's also doable. But yeah, using server-side rendering generally has a higher impact in terms of the performance, just because it just renders the page that you need at the time, and you don't have to use or have the entire bundle of application in the browser. Yeah, I think if you don't have the luxury and you happen to have the web application being rendered on the client side, then you can make use of what Loïc mentioned and what we've touched on. So being able to code split, being able to use a tool that can split up the bundles that you have. You don't want to have just one chunk of the entire bundle being rendered. You want to have different chunks based on the priority that you want the application to be made visible to the user. And yeah, I think that's my take.
Maybe one second add to that. At the ignition, you have to write tools for web problems. One thing people forget about, I remember one website I worked on, it was all using spans. Whatever there was text was span. They said, I took maybe as SEO course maybe months ago before that. So I said, people even recognize, find this website on Google. It's something you need to keep in mind. The server side or client side is going to affect your SEO. It's not in terms of performance, but it's something in user experience. If they can't search websites on Google, what I do. So if you need something to be searchable, you go with the server side because Google is going to power to your website and then it has to be rendered before it reaches there. And if you are building maybe dashboards where people are interacting with platforms and the other things, you need to go with client. For now, next year 13, it actually guides you. If you are building, you need to use a hook and then you know what? This is going to be user action, so it can't happen on server. It has to be client side. So depends on the problem you're trying to solve.
Thank you. I'm Issa Jean Marie, full stack developer at Kasha. So my question is not going to be more technical. It's about more of emotional intelligence. People at Irembo, those developers, how do you feel when you are having almost a downtime of that system that solves for almost every service in the country? If you have more than an hour as a downtime, how do you feel in your team? And as we are talking about front end, so how are you trying to link the overchanging technologies that are happening and the existing systems that you are using, they are the stovepipe of the government services? Yeah, in your team, that's my question. We are having new coming convertible smartphones. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to understand. Thank you.
I think in terms of the downtime, it still is one of our OKRs to have the least amount of downtime. And when we say downtime, it's not just on the front end, it's the whole entire application. There's the infrastructure, there's the network, all of that. And like I mentioned, it's an iterative process. Now, when you come with this challenge of saying, hey, we have been experiencing a lot of downtime, you need to come up and say, what are the parts that really affect the system the most?
Yeah, my name is Emmanuel Ngobito. I'm a software engineer. My question is as the system judge, most of the time are the end users, so who interact with the front end. My question is asking which technique can we use to keep the attention of those end users when the system required to make some kind of request to backend? So there will be the response time. We're going to wait. So which technique can we use to keep the attention of those end users as they are the judges? And I have another question asking, in case you have a big data set, like the list of users, is it a good idea to fetch all those data and make like a computing, like a filtering or selection on the front end, or it's going to be on the backend side? I have another questions about the state management tool, or can use hooks, which is the best practice to keep our system performance. Those are my questions. Thank you.
First one was about keeping people engaged when they are waiting for the response, right? Yeah. One thing is, I said it in the beginning, is we're adding loaders maybe skeletons. UI UX designers can help you with that. That's very important. I actually read something when I was reading about user experience, and they said, let me give you an example. People here in Rwanda, they don't like buying cars from Volkswagen because it takes like a day or two. So they just want to buy it from Korea or somewhere, wait for 3 months, and then when it comes, they go with the whole family to get it. That's feelings. Those feelings, it's maybe psychological thing we all have. So if you didn't wait for something, you don't give it that much value. But if you waited a little bit, I want it. You're craving. So that thing I read, it said some websites, some giant companies like Google, they use this technique to, even if something is there, they can add loaders. Even if it's there, they add loaders to make sure you get that value of something you're looking for. So loaders are very important. They don't affect performance that much, a little bit maybe, but what they give, the positive feedback or the positive impact they make to people, so, it's more important, to ignore, too important to ignore them. So loaders, that's one thing you can do. I think the only thing you can do.
So do you want to take the second question?
Sure. What was the second question again?
It's about fetching the big data.
Okay, I think I had mentioned it before. It's mostly just making sure it's not a good idea to give an entire list, 1,000 items in one go, right? So if you can, try to partition the information that you provide to the user. And that's done by pagination. So when a user maybe tries to get to the next page or scroll down, you have an animation that provides them some next items that you want to be used. I think it's a two-way thing. So the UI has to tell the backend, I want this amount of items at this page, and then the backend does the logic to provide you the amount. Yeah.
What was the third one again? State management tool. Oh, state management tool. I mean, what do you use on your front end?
Like Redux.
You use Redux.
There you go.
I mean, you can keep using Redux. I mean, I feel like at this point, personally, I used to use Redux. I used to love Redux. I moved away from Redux to just using React hooks, and but also there's a library that I use called React Query, by a guy called
Stanley.
Something. I'll send you the link if you. But it's basically it helps you with caching the requests you make to the backend, right? So nothing against Redux. But there are also other tools like MobX that I've tried maybe a couple of times. But personally, I feel like Redux adds more complexity to the front end that is not really needed. So I usually just go for using React hooks. And if you ask me, I would encourage you to consider.
Asking about the comparison between hooks and Redux in case of performance.
In case of performance-wise, I'm not sure because I have not compared them. But I can tell you that the application that I used to work on using Redux, but it also used Create React App, and it wasn't server rendered. It was less performant than what I use now, which is only hooks and React Query that I told you about. So and server rendering as well. So I would encourage you to try that formula. It worked for me. Yeah.
If I could add, I think also in terms of debugging something that's built on Redux, trust me, it's not fun, right? Because you have everything going all at once, so it's pretty hard. But if you have at least hooks, it's a bit simpler.
I think RTK have made it simpler.
Honestly, I think whoever thought about The creator of Redux actually said it was a bad idea. I think he works at Facebook now. Whoever thought of putting a state machine on the front end? Yeah.
Okay, so unfortunately, this is all the time we had for questions.
Just one more question.
But
That's one.
just one, just one. Okay.
You'll be answering it.
That's hard question.
Okay, put you on.
Keep that.
Thank you. My name is Brian. I'm a backend engineer at Awesomity Lab. And my question goes to all the panelists. So to what extent do you think, as a front-end engineer, to what extent do you think you should know the structure of the backend you're working with? In terms of like entities and how they're connected and stuff like that. To what extent do you think you should know about it? And do you think it will help in performance optimization for the front end? Do you think it will help improve that performance?
So interesting.
Some should answer that. He does backend. I don't do backend. So I'll answer honestly. Accent actually shouldn't know. Why do you care?
I disagree.
But
Yeah,
one
I do.
thing you should maybe know is the whole structure of the project. I don't do backend. I really don't care about backend. I never ask about backend. But one thing I really crave to know is how, if it's a system we're building, how it is structured. Understanding the flow, how everything connects together, connects with each other. That's the only thing I want to know. About your tables and whatever, I don't want to know.
I'll take a different route from what you just said. I would like to know everything. I'm just saying, no, but for instance, the projects that we work on at RSSB, we use TypeScript on the front end. I think you guys do too, right? Angular is TypeScript. And you need to know that this type safety is just a big plus, fewer errors on the front end, fewer JavaScript errors, and knowing the structure of your very well structured tables helps, right? So I think using a tool like Swagger, I'm sure you guys use Swagger. Swagger for who knows about Swagger? If you're a backend engineer, you should look up Swagger. It's a great tool. So if I'm working with a backend engineer and they use Swagger, it's very easy for me to look up the types they use and just replicate them on my, on the front end. And also, types don't really they don't affect the bundle size. They don't, it goes away when you minify and bundle the project. So it's just provides another layer of safety. One thing that I would like to say though is working with backend engineers. I think one person asked the question: if you're working with a backend engineer, you really want to work hand in hand. I've seen projects where backend engineer will go and just cook up a whole API with all the endpoints and give it to the front end engineer, and it's the work of the front end engineer to figure out what to call endpoint A to get to one key and then call 3 other endpoints to. When if you started working since the get-go, it would be so much easier to build endpoints that work for the front end. Because at the end of the day, you're not building for people who use Postman. You're using people who use a UI. So yeah, that's one other thing that would